Thanks, monsieur.
Chapter 26, Doctor's Orders. Jerry, let's unpeel you and have a look at your head, shall we? Dr. Skelton was pleasant, but spoke the words sternly, like he was negotiating a stick from the mouth of a sharp-toothed pup. Okay, let's go, he briskly told Dr. Skelton. 2 nights prior, Jerry had seen a rerun of a spooky TV episode where hospitalized patients have the gauze removed from their fully bandaged heads to reveal newly sculpted, ugly pig feature faces. Except in the TV show, the twist is that the post-op face revealed is a pretty human one. It was the doctors who all had the horror show hogsmugs. He giggled at the thought as Skelton, his face smacking Jerry's face, leant in and unwound the 2-inch wide white strips from his crown. Jerry thought that Dr. Skelton just had to have the biggest nostrils on any human he had ever seen. It felt like a swarm of big butterflies playing at his face when what he expected was a swarm of bees, as Skelton cut loose the lengths of tiny twine. So he told his mom and dad later. The cut on his face was not so deep. Its scar was nothing but a wisp, a whitish curl winding about his left cheek. The stitches that came out of the back of his head felt much different. Jerry was unnerved by the metal snap of the snips the doctor had made to remove them from his head. But to the last, they never had caused him any pain. That was from the previous visit when Jerry had had the stitches removed from his head and his face. Now, returned to Skelton's office, it had been 2 months to the day since he had come home from the hospital. The doctor had just spent 10 minutes testing his reflexes, shining lights in his eyes, asking him easy questions, Jerry thought, and murmuring, good, and marvelous at every turn, including his last turn before leaving the room, which was to poke at the back of his head and pronounce his finding satisfactory. You're a healing marvel, Jerry Lake. Now sit down and I'll be right back, he said as he slipped out the door. Rubbing at the back of his head, letting his fingertips tickle at the mange of fuzzy duckling-like hair beginning to cover the scar, Jerry recalled when he had first returned home from the hospital. Those first days when he would find himself groggy and unable to read at times without feeling waves of nausea ripple from his head down to his bowels and back up again. Despite him telling his parents and convincing himself that he only had little headaches when he read for too long. But he never did throw up, and the nausea faded with each day, until he did lose his pumpkin pie that Thanksgiving, the pumpkin pie being the last in a marathon feeding for the boy who was only just coming off the blandest of hospital victuals. Cardboard cuisine, Skelton had joked when making the rounds. Jerry promptly ran to the bathroom and lost his full fall bounty in the toilet upon swallowing the last spoonful of tan, sweet, cream-covered, crumbly-crusted delight. He's all right, Jill, Rob said, looking more concerned than Jill, as they both stood outside the closed bathroom door. It was the little used except for hand-washing bathroom behind the kitchen closet. All right, Jerry? You're not dizzy, are you, sweetie? Jill was a second away from calling Dr. Skelton. Jerry coughed, then chirped. No, it's just my stomach. I ate too much. Feel better now. He flushed to the toilet, rinsed his face, and came back out clear-eyed, to the breathy relief of his parents. Still, Jill patted his face with a kitchen towel. He ate too much too quickly, said Rob. We should have watched for that. I was happy to see you had your appetite back, Jill told Jerry. By nearer to the end of the year, the only visible reminder of the event, besides his shrinking head dressings, the healing wound on his cheek, came in the much drier-than-vomit rectangular form of a Christmas card from Herman Harman. Harman never went back to visit Jerry during his stay at the hospital. When he called the house a week after Rob had run into him in the elevator, Jill answered and simply said her husband was not at home and hung up. Rob had told her about their run-in. She was sure Harman was to blame for everything, and she wondered why not more people thought so. Why Harman was not suspended like Reaper, or, more justly in her view, not bounced for good like him. Him being Armadillo, a creature she continued to have occasional nightmares about decades later, long after Rip Rink was buried under tarmac, a bus depot in its place. Next came the card. a hockey stick-wielding Santa Claus, a fierce to the point of contradicting the true spirit of the holiday sort of Saint Nick, decorated the face of Harman's Christmas card. The axe-murderer aura Santa wore an oversized, even for Santa, hockey jersey on top of his traditional red and white and black buckle and boots costume. The stick he held high over his head, two-hander style. The greeting card artist had intended this Santa to be using the stick, practically enough, as a pole for his huge sack of gifts. He had it hooked over the blade at his back, the sack dangling over Santa's head, and behind him. Still, the combination of the sack blending with the background of the card, an ice rink and arena stands full of manic faces, and the pose of the etched Saint Nick with his stick tensely cranked up over his shoulder, gave off one impression only. Santa was hauling off for the kill. The card was addressed to the Lake family, but inside only Jerry had a mention. To Jerry, it said above green and red sparkling letters reading, Santa says, and then there was a line to fill in your own message. Into the space for the do-it-yourself Yuletide greeting, Harman had written, Get well soon, and signed it, Your Coach, Bantamay. Harman's assumption was correct. They all knew who had sent it. Rob handed him the seasonal greeting, and Jerry felt a glow at seeing his name still attached to those magic words. Bantamay. He didn't think much about his coach, not at all. Didn't blame him like the others for putting him out there on the ice. He wasn't comfortable with thinking about Harman, was never comfortable in his presence that short season. But he didn't blame him for anything either, not for something he couldn't even remember and had to be told. Harman put him on the first A-team he had ever skated with, in his last days of it mattering. Being on the ice, whatever the circumstances, no matter the motive, still made him happy to be himself. It's from your coach, Jerry, is all his dad said. Jerry put the card out in the garage, nailing it to the back of his improvised, personalized, and dormant equipment rack. Tacked a universe away from Uncle Bob's dubious jockstrap and cup hook and portrait, the card from his coach was placed on a clean patch of chipboard. Jerry put it above the shining silver diamond-shaped doorknob, where he slung his skates, laces of both tied in a big bow. He was still on the team. This made it so, no matter what Skelton was about to tell him. It was all happening fast. Jerry was happy for this day. He had been dreaming of this day. This was the day that, as far as he, himself, and him, Jerry, was concerned, would mark what was equal to his return to the hockey rink. January 24th is Jerry's last scheduled appointment. His dad told Uncle Bob over the phone on Sunday. He'll have checkups later and go back probably once before he starts school in March, but he gets an all clear here, and it's going to be a big, big step. The biggest step so far. Yeah, the doctor says he's doing really good. Better than any of them had anticipated. Bob pretended to rankle at the other end of the line. Jerry, perking his ears to catch the gist of the irregular family chat with his erstwhile uncle, while watching a Bruins game from the couch, wondered what Bob had to say. Anticipated? Bob said over the receiver. Well, I guess the learned doctors didn't know whose nephew they were treating. Rob, you should have told them. Remember when I had my head baptized by the goalpost in high school? Don't think I was even wearing a helmet. Baptized and confirmed, Rob deadpanned replied, then winced over at Jerry, who turned around to catch wind of whatever he could from the conversation. No, not too many helmets around back then either, Bob blithely recalled. Yeah, I know. I played hockey too. Almost 20 years before you, I hate to say. And there were no helmets for us at all, Rob drawled. No helmets. Pads, no better than worn-out little pillows. Cardboard, you mean? Like strapping on empty cereal boxes by the time I got to use them. Bob continued right over what his brother was saying. I got knocked for 10 when I knocked into that net. Never missed a minute, though. Jerry's taking right after me, the sounds of things. A minute? I think you missed something like a week at the dentist's, if I remember it right. But Jerry, he's hanging in there. Rob nodded at his son, Bob's miraculous by way of bloodline nephew. Jerry smiled and turned back to the tube to see Johnny Mackenzie spill a Montreal Canadiens defenseman with a butt-out hip check as the blue liner tried to spin out of his own zone. Jerry was glad to be seeing Skelton again. Giddy to be so close to being done with this whole mess, as close as he had been since that blackout night in November, to putting it in the past and leaving it stuck to the empty square of an out-of-date calendar, something he was already referring to having happened last year. The door to Skelton's office swung open. It was Nurse Willow. She tilted her head in his direction, still holding on to the door. "Oh, Jerry, your dad is here, in the waiting room, having a quick talk with Dr. Skelton before he comes in. Won't be but a few more minutes." The door shut, and Jerry sat back and relaxed in the high-backed leather chair that faced the front of Dr. Skelton's desk. As the back of his head sank into the soft skin of the furniture, the healed wound itched the slightest bit. Then the same cushioned pressure of the back of the chair made it go away. He looked around the room, at the antique skeleton diagram that hung framed on the wall behind the desk. The bones were the color of mocha, and the background was a pale green. The figure was life-size, if the life it was sizing up was only 4 foot tall. It seemed to Jerry to have French writing on it, listing all the bones of the body. He looked down at the claw-like frame of the feet. That's what his feet were going to feel like when he started skating again, he thought. Raw. It did not bother him, though. Jerry was stricken now, impressed at this point, the end point he was convinced of his journey through hurt and hardship, at what little hurt he had indeed suffered. When he'd come to in the hospital, he had the headache of his life. That he would never forget. He mostly slept the first days, after coming out of his coma, and soon medicated. Pain was really never something he had to get his mind around. Once at home, the headaches and upset stomach got to him only the one time, really, at Thanksgiving. After that, every day, the occasional ringing in his head drifted away until by Christmas it was completely gone. With this visit out of the way, he could think about skating again, although he'd already been told he'd be kept out of school for some weeks still, as a precaution. So he looked at the bones of the feet on Dr. Skelton's wall and began to ponder pain. A pain more real to him than the pain he suffered, or did not suffer, from having his head mashed into solid ice. He looked down at his own feet and tapped together his toes. Jerry's feet had to go through a kind of growing pain, though nothing was growing except for his ice time, every end of summer, when, back at the rink, he would lace up his skates for the new season. For the first few times out, his feet would feel like they were bound in an iron trap designed to snare small game. His skates weren't too small. Rob always made sure that Jerry had the top line, and that of course they fit. His feet just didn't like being shackled up in thick, stiff leather. Not after 3 months of going free and warm, ocean-washed and shoeless. That Bobby Orr skated barefoot only added to the NHL's best-ever defenseman's superhuman status in Jerry's eyes. He got up to examine the chart more closely. "Never knew there were so many bones in your feet," Jerry mused. "Have to ask Dr. Skelton about that." He continued contemplating, more cheerful in spirit by the second. Start of skating foot pain was synonymous with playing hockey at least, making his hurt to be a kind of pleasing, in its own way, little agony to prepare for. Maybe Dr. Skelton could help me with that too. Jerry's thoughts were scattered by Skelton's voice. "Interested in the anatomy, eh, Jerry? Want to become a doctor when you're all grown up?" Dr. Skelton entered the room like a shadow. "You'll need to hit the books even harder than you hit the ice." He caught himself. "I should say harder than you play hockey. At school, how do you do at science and math? Taken biology class yet?" Dr. Skelton put his arm around Jerry's shoulders, steering him back around the desk and over to the big chair. The doctor sat down too, behind the desk, giving Jerry a long, probing look as he sank into the seat opposite. "I was just wondering, Dr. Skelton," Jerry asked, relaxed, relieved, and feeling full of himself. "What is it that makes your feet feel, well, like they're being squeezed in a vice or something the first time you start skating after summer? It doesn't last for more than a few times, but you, at least me, I can never get away from it, and I always hate it. I was thinking, after this time I need to rest, I'll be having to go through that all over again, and for a second time in one season, and sheesh." Skelton stitched his eyebrows into a ragged V. Jerry batted his eyes and missed the curious ripple that skid across the doctor's face in an instant. He raised his feet off the floor, pointed at them. I wish somebody could say, "No, they won't hurt, you know? Like you said, it won't hurt when you took my stitches out that day, remember? Sure wish a doctor could tell me that when I put my skates back on at practice." Jerry plunked his feet back on the floor. "Are you a foot doctor too, Dr. Skelton? Could you do something for them that could let you say, 'It won't hurt again'?" Jerry was radiant and playful, smiling wider than he had since the night he made the team, soon after his feet stopped hurting last September.
Is it strange to dance so soon? Myself out of
Chapter 27, The Bench Comes Home.
I dance myself out of the womb.
Dr. Skelton rose from his desk. He peered down at Jerry with a lingering look. Like watching molasses empty from a jar is what it felt like in anticipation of what the doctor was going to say. Jerry did not like the feeling. "He's not going to talk about my feet," he thought. Skelton broke his long pose, looked away from Jerry, smiled, and gestured back to the anatomical diagram on the wall, the collection of calcium that bore the stark resemblance to his name. The skeleton, Jerry. There it is. This map of human bones was drawn 300 years ago. I had to draw one just like it from memory, from what I learned when I took my first test to become a doctor. Not quite 300 years ago. Jerry lifted his closed lips. Skelton lowered his own. Bones. Those bones in your sensitive feet, Jerry. The first thing you learn about them when you study to become a doctor is what their most basic function is. And that is, and he turned to nod at the drawing, skeletal. "Is that where you got your name?" Jerry found himself saying without meaning to. No, I was born with that." He fumbled, not accustomed to Jerry being any kind of a wise guy. "Like we were all born with skeletons?" Jerry was surprised again to hear himself say. That's right. Now, pay attention. This is important. What skeletal means is simply the frames from which we are all put together. And the muscles and everything else on the outside protects the bones, right, Dr. Skelton? Yes, Dr. Skelton said, surprised at Jerry's quick uptake on his dissertation. Yes, layers and layers of skin, ligaments, tendons, muscles, and sinews, all that protects the prime mechanism of your movement through this world. But then, like my name, as you, perhaps cleverly, I'm not so sure, Skelton tapped on his table and smiled out the window, then looked back at Jerry. But perhaps, as you pointed out, my name's Skelton and the skeleton have a common bond, however two distinct meanings. One is what it is, the picture on the wall. The other, me. I was only joking, Jerry interrupted meekly. Oh, no trouble at all, Jerry. Glad you were in a joking mood. You've been through so much. The point, though, is this. Like my name, and the common skeleton in question refer to two different things in nearly the same way. And I'll tell you, at medical school I took some ribbing for this, as one could imagine. Ribbing? Jerry said, half grinning, lifting an arm like a chicken's wing, and pointing a thumb under it at his side. There you have it, Jerry. Yes, the ribs. Skelton erupted. The two meanings, or two functions of the bones of our skeleton. To make a frame for our bodies, and, most essentially, our skeletons also serve as that same sort of protection as you so smartly noted, just like the skin and muscle when it comes to the vital organs of the body. Indeed, Jerry, the ribs. Jerry felt like he was at the head of his class, which was doubly wonderful for the day he was to have marked his first step on the return to school, yes, but better yet, to that other learning place, the rink. Not only was he within gliding distance of the iced oval, but Dr. Skelton was treating him like a prize student of the human body. And this for a boy who had never pulled over a C- in any science or arithmetic class since 5th grade. And what do the ribs do, Jerry? and we'll call them ribs for these purposes. They have proper Latin names, as we have here on the diagram. But that is not important. Now, Jerry, what do your ribs surround? My stomach. Stomach and so much more, Skelton replied, turning to flash his hands about the trunk of the diagram. Heart and lungs, Jerry. Your ribs protect your heart and your lungs, like a safe keeps a hold of a miser's fortune. You cannot live without these organs, yes? So, the skeleton makes sure, 1, they stay in place, and 2, that they are protected, like with a bodily armor. Nothing more important to keep from getting hurt than your heart, said Jerry, getting into the spirit of the lecture. Nothing more? No, you're right, almost. But Jerry, tell me, who is more important to you, your mother or your father? Jerry was tossed a curve, and he swung at it wildly. Both of 'em, of course. Can't have one without the other, he said. When one such as yourself is fortunate to have both parents loving and supporting you, and most of the children in the world who have this are the lucky ones, believe me, you'll see as you get older. It is a world of orphans. But I am going off the track. Like you say, cannot have one without the other. But on a master scale of the vital organs, we have 2 elements, like father and mother, giving birth to the life of a body over and over again, 24 hours of every day. I have told you what you already know, that your ribs hold one of them, your heart. What is the other? Jerry, if the heart is the mother, who or what is the father? You tell me. The brain? Jerry asked. He pointed at his ear. There you have it. Skelton's white-tasseled head nodded like a horse ducking flies. Your brain. Well, then, maybe calling somebody a bonehead isn't such a smart thing for a person to say. Not unless you want to be calling yourself a dummy. Huh, Dr. Skelton? Of course, whoever is a bonehead, we're all boneheads, right? Your scalp, your skull, it's like your brain's hockey helmet. Your cranium is precisely your brain's nature-built hockey helmet. And for a lifetime, Skelton paused, an arch flash of seriousness cast across his face, then wasn't there. You will leave this office today with an A+ for your medical aptitude. I think you have a future in the field. That's good, because I never even passed the last chemistry test I had before I got hurt. You never mind. Hard work, the proper attitude, and I think we'll see MD follow the name Jerry Lake before you're through with classes, tests, and papers. Thanks, Doctor, Jerry bubbled, shifting in his seat like an excited toddler now. But I'm going to be a hockey player in college if I can. Someplace or other. At least that's what I'm concentrating on. How long do you have to go to college before you come out a doctor? Skelton walked away from the chart, feeling his way to the front of his desk. Jerry saw him suddenly as resuming the uncharacteristic slothfulness, exuding the labored mood he had when he first got up from his chair to talk about bones. Skelton gently pushed the few items upon it from the edge to the middle of his big desk, his tome-sized book on the brain. He had one in each office, at the hospital and here as well. A pile of papers, a cup emblazoned with, "The doctor is in." The in much larger characters than the first 2 words, and in wild, psychedelic colors. He did not take his eyes off Jerry as he sat on the edge of his cleared desk opposite the boy, placing his hands on his own knees and exhaling down to his last wisp of air. Jerry, tell me, how have you been the last few weeks, since we last spoke, since you last came to the office? Have you had any headaches? Any dizziness at all? Sickness or trouble with your vision? With reading? Ringing in your ears like when you first went home from the hospital? Any little thing, even the tiniest touches. We need to be honest with each other. I need to be very honest with you, Jerry. Tell me. Jerry cocked his head to the side and looked over Skelton's white thatch of hair back up at the skeleton. I think I'm fine, Dr. Skelton. I haven't had anything like a headache for weeks now. He lowered his view from the wall to look Skelton in the face and began to feel a tinge of nothing like a headache or dizziness, nothing physically to do with his injury. It was true. He had not felt in the least bit impaired by his damaged head, not for many weeks. But jittery he was. Dr. Skelton's sudden sullen manner, the way he looked down on Jerry, the joy of the wonders of the bones gone from his eyes, his voice slowing from a trot to now tiptoe over the top of Jerry's buoyant mood. This was giving him a hollow feeling. The feeling was close cousin to the same confused unease that brushed his insides like a swab of brine when, scary as a skeleton at midnight, Nell Bell passed him by without a glance at school. She was the older girl Jerry had had a crush on for as long as he'd ever known what the word meant. He stared when he first caught sight of her. Strutting his way, her cinnamon freckles seemed to multiply with every step towards her he took, on a collision course that would never have them come close to colliding, but would make him feel some kind of impact all the same. When Nell was less than 5 paces away, Jerry tore his gaze from her, rationing his eyes to take one more peek. The scuff of her footsteps waltzed in his ears. Jerry was sure not to move his neck or head when he broadsided her with his last glance of this silent, solitary encounter. Switching his sights hard left, eyes unnaturally darting to the side like a suddenly distracted ventriloquist's dummy, he caught the full force of Nell, now both at arm's length and a galaxy's distance away. If she looked back, and that did happen once or twice in September, when he was actually in the same school as her, that's when Jerry would feel the struts in his soul turn to toasted marshmallow. Jerry thought of her as more of a lady. She was a senior, an honors student next year headed to an Ivy League school, and often traveling the country as one of the best ballerinas in the land, with he only barely a freshman of no distinction. Was it a crush? Or was he just crushed? Is that what it meant? Were they the same thing? Jerry wondered. Talk about skeletal integrity. He felt something like this as Skelton, now silent, continued to stare down at him in the chair, like when Nell passed him by in the hall. But this was not a crush on some girl who scared him silly. It was Dr. Skelton, and the vibe he was giving off felt like the crush you'd feel should a boulder roll over your paper house of dreams. "Your feet," Skelton said, then stopped, this time inhaling back up all the air his endless sigh had pumped into the room moments before. "They're going to hurt again, I know it, just as soon as I start skating. Next week, Dr. Skelton," Jerry bleated. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Can you do something about them too?" "Jerry, your feet, they're not going to hurt you. Not just yet," Skelton said blankly. "They're not?" Jerry pasted a grin back across his face. He found he needed to make a strenuous effort to do so. Skelton got up from the front of the desk, walked to the back of it, pulled out his chair, and sat down. He took hold of the huge hardcover tabletop book for doctors edition called The Human Brain, etc., the one he wrote, and flipping it around, the right side up to face Jerry, he opened it. Sure enough, there was revealed, folded out from the middle above the binding like a pin-up in a magazine, a life-sized, full-color rendition of a rumpled, pale, pinkish-gray brain. Jerry immediately focused on the pages, leant forward to focus in a little tighter still. He raised his eyes like he was stealing a glimpse of Nell at the water fountain at school. I know what that is, but haven't you got a book on the feet? I want you to think of this brain, your brain, as your feet," Skelton said, serious as Jerry's always in a grimace math teacher from last year, Mr. Roachfast. Had his impromptu lesson from Dr. Skelton not been going as well as he had imagined? "Brains in my feet?" he thought. "I'm going to go home with an F. He really thinks I'm a dimwit." "Oh, what do you mean, Dr. Skelton? Brains and feet?" "Not any brain, or just any feet, Jerry, but your brain and your feet. Let me tell you about their connection." "He does think I'm a dummy," Jerry sighed to himself. "Brain, feet, and flexibility," Skelton continued, now brightening to his task. "Your feet hurt when you put the skates back on. I will recommend to your parents a podiatrist, a foot doctor, who can help you with that. Because, in a sense, when you bind them up in leather, then put all the pressure your body can muster down onto the bottom of them, what is happening is that you are remodeling your anatomy, remodeling your feet. And your feet, as you can see," and here Skelton turned from the desk to wave his arm back at the diagram on the wall, pointing down low, "they have many a moving part. The foot flexes and moves. The foot, Jerry, is alive." Jerry automatically flickered images in his mind from one of his favorite creature features of all, Frankenstein. "And your or my or anybody's brain, that's alive too, right, Dr. Skelton? Is that what you mean?" "I'm getting to it. Getting there, Jerry. You see, indeed the brain is alive, and works day and night to keep the rest of you alive, to keep your feet skating." "Can't wait till next week," Jerry yelped. Skelton frowned, regretting what he had said, and carried on. "Thing is, Jerry, when your feet hurt, what is causing them to hurt, in a very small way, is the physical trauma they're receiving, from having to be jammed into tight, restrictive boots, then having to bear the weight and impact of a body lunging about. Believe me, Jerry, skating is no fun for the feet." "Oh, but they do get used to it, after a little while," Jerry pleaded. "After a little while, of course, but during that initial period, what do you feel?" "Like I said, Dr. Skelton, boy, do they hurt." "And what did we say right at the beginning, when we first spoke after you woke up at the hospital? Do you remember? How pain is your body's way of telling you that it is in distress? Hurt feet, hurt head, tip of your nose, wherever. Remember?" "I remember," Jerry answered smartly. He felt more like he was catching on. "Good. Well, you know, your head, like your feet, received a good deal of trauma. But unlike your feet, where that hurt is something that you can just skate right through, when it comes to your head, it is quite a different matter. You see, your cranium is the least flexible bone in your body." Skelton picked the big book back up, held it upright, pushed it out in front of him, bringing the brain and Jerry face to face. The doctor disappeared from Jerry's view, behind the standing pages, the opened book the size of a fully revealed double LP record album cover sitting tall at the end of the desk. Jerry was enveloped by the brain. He bore into it with his eyes, wondering which wrinkle inside his own head might represent the black night he could not remember. Skelton reappeared, tilting his face back into Jerry's view from the side of the raised volume. "And unlike the bones of your feet, Jerry, your skull, like your ribs, is there to also protect the vital of vital organs, number one. The father of the vitals, remember? The brain." Jerry thought for a moment. "But my mom, she does the whole crossword every Sunday, Dr. Skelton, and my dad, he can hardly spell." "Figure of speech, Jerry." "Oh, okay, I thought so. Yeah, I get all that, but..." "But, while your feet grow accustomed to the trauma they suffer at the start of skating season, so that it virtually disappears before you know it, your brain, once impacted, once it suffers the type of trauma your head was stricken with, even though it may not hurt you any more, it remains. Very quietly, it remains." Dr. Skelton leant further over his desk, reached for one end of the book, and firmly took hold of the cover. It stayed open, unmoving, still propped up as it had been as he delicately pinched the top corner of the left page with his other hand. He tugged it with a jolt. The paper ripped at once, smoothly cutting the back end of the brain in half, with a tear most of the way down the shiny page. Jerry's face went limp. "Jerry, I want you to take the book," Skelton said, handing it to him, placing the torn page before his patient. Jerry propped the book on his knees, holding it at either end. The tear, 3/4 of the way down the left side, caused the top of the page to flop down. Without looking at Dr. Skelton, Jerry lifted the top of the torn page back up, holding it in place with one hand. Skelton opened and closed a desk drawer. "That's it, Jerry. Hold the torn page together, steady, right there," Skelton said, hunching over him, a silver container the size of a small tube of toothpaste in his hand. He unfixed the lid with a twist, and out came an equally miniature black-bristled brush, glistening with glue. It smelled of model planes Jerry had never succeeded in completing, depressing him on the spot. He curled up the skin on his nose. Skelton expertly, as only a brain surgeon, good dentist, or quality house painter could, dabbed a chorus of dainty strokes of adhesive precisely across the tear, from top to bottom. The glue took immediately, making the gash in the brain on the page gleam, like it was having a stroke of genius rip through its cells. Now hold it, don't let go, and we'll count to 10. This glue is most superior, the doctor said. He placed the tiny brush back in the tube and twisted it shut. Jerry gently blew on the crease, watching the glue dry before his eyes. Both counted to 10 and then to 10 again, separately and in silence. Don't know, Doctor. I don't think this will hold very well. You really should tape it back together, said Jerry. I mean, it looks like it's all in one piece again, but it's just that little bit of glue crossing over from one side of the tear to the other. Just a little string of it, you know? It isn't strong enough to ever hold. Tape would be better. You think so? I don't know, Jerry replied, now puzzled. Let's look, Skelton said. Hold your hands away from the page now. Just hold open the cover of the book, very firmly on both sides. That's it. Well, you see, it's taking. Appears to be just fine. Don't suppose he's got a headache anymore either. What do you think? Yeah, it looks like it's together, but it wouldn't take much to tear it open again. Probably just somebody turning the page. I think you should try some clear tape, Jerry said, groping around the room with his eyes. Hey, there it is, over on the counter, near the bag of cotton balls over there, over by the sink. Hang on to the book, Jerry, but be gentle. I'll do what you say, said Skelton as he scooped up the tape dispenser and brought it to where Jerry sat. Let's try this, shall we? Major surgery. See? You'll be sinking stitches like a true pro before you've taken your first biology class. Fine instincts. I've got one of those next semester, Jerry moaned. Skelton rolled off a long strip of tape, took it in both hands masterfully, and swooped down upon the book. Folding the piece of tape over both sides of the torn page, back and front, and smoothing it down with his thumbs, Dr. Skelton pronounced his operation a success. Just like new. Jerry, just like you. Uh-huh, came the satisfied reply. Now, let me have the book, Skelton commanded. Jerry let go of the heavy front and back cover of the book on the brain, and Skelton lifted it from his lap in one motion. Jerry felt an unease, as if removing the weight of the book had set him off balance. Skelton stepped back 3 paces, opened the book wide to the mended page, raised it over his head. Jerry fixed his eyes on the shining tape and glue-mended breach in the picture of the brain, and wondered if that is what the back of his most vital organ had looked like underneath his nicked skull. Like a thunderclap bursting from a cloudless sky, the thought seized Jerry's mind that he should duck. Dr. Skelton was going to throw this book the weight of a large brick right down upon him. Skelton tossed the book flat to the floor at Jerry's feet. It landed with a slap and a skid, sounding to Jerry like a big stone hitting water, its violent ripples silenced by its own initial splash. He had shut his eyes, but opened them upon hearing the sound of the book meeting the floor. He was shocked to see Skelton's right foot lash out at the thing, kicking the book of the brain clearly to the other side of the room. It bounced off the lower cupboard and lay open, crunched pages down. Oh no, Jerry's mind raced. The brain doctor's insane. Jerry, you're a sensible, intelligent boy, Skelton said, deliberately crossing the room to retrieve the book and frowning slightly at the pain tweaking his big toe. He crouched to snatch it up from the floor with both hands and turned to Jerry. You might think me mad, I know. Kicking books about my office, defacing them right in front of you like this. And I wrote it, too. No, you're trying to tell me something about the bones and the skeleton. I know, Jerry said, concerned, and hoping that Skelton kicking the book across the floor might in some way have something to do with his unanswered question about his feet. Indeed, Skelton said, and he advanced 2 steps to the chair where Jerry sat. He opened the book to the page with the torn and reconnected brain, and faced it at Jerry. But the brain was mended no more. This time the damage was complete. One half, the back half of the brain, tape still attached, fell from the book and struck the floor. The doctor closed the book. Creases lining his cheeks, Skelton returned the beaten-up volume to his desk, then leant back against the front of it, saying, "Jerry, we don't want to find out one day that we have to close the book on you." "I'm all right," Jerry gasped. "I know," Skelton countered, level and thoughtful, kind in tone, but also definitive as a detective laying out his solved case. "I'll have to get another book. That one is ruined. The fold-out page on the brain? It may have been all right if we let the glue dry. A long process. Then left the book alone for a very long time, and then perhaps never again turning the pages with the same blind ease we once used before I tore it. But you see, another rip, a drop, a kick, and the most important picture in the book, the reason the book exists in the first place, it is never the same. Have to put in for a new one. Can never put in for a new you." Jerry felt a surge of disappointment wash right over the top of his head. "I'll be careful, Dr. Skelton. I won't get hurt again, you bet," Jerry said without knowing his voice was in action. "Jerry, the point is, I have to tell you, you cannot get hurt again," Skelton said as if his words were being applied with a steamroller, its huge wheel wrapped in a luxury mattress. "We cannot risk it. The severity of your concussion at your age requires that I recommend, and I have already advised your mother and father, they thought it best that I tell you, you're a big boy now after all, that you must stay off the ice. I'm sorry, Jerry, I am. You are very lucky, and the bottom line is this: another injury, trauma to the head, and there could be severe and lasting—" "Off the ice," Jerry mouthed, not whispering. It seemed not out loud. "Off the ice? For how long?" "Let's just say off the ice, and no vigorous play or work the rest of the calendar year." But the year? The year only just started," Jerry said in a flat panic. "To be on the safe side," Skelton answered. He tried to smile, couldn't, and pointed at his desk. "Remember the poor book," he added, still not quite smiling. "Yes, Dr. Skelton, it's Robert Lake. Sorry to bother you again, but we don't know what to do about Jerry. Rob told the doctor over the telephone from work before his first coffee had cooled down enough to drink. After we got home from your office, I tried to talk to him, went up to his room that night and tried to make him see it was for the best, you know, and that it wasn't going to be forever. He'd skate again, and there's always next season. But he's just gone and clammed right up, stayed in his room all weekend." The trip back home from Skelton's office seemed longer than it actually was. Rob would never say so, but he was both comfortable with and grateful for the fact that Jerry would never pester him behind the wheel on their many road trips, up to Maine, over to Buffalo, or to the Cape in the summertime. While most kids would not be able to help themselves from peppering their dads with the stock-in-trade kid questions everyone knows are annoying, Jerry kept to himself. The times a teammate would hitch a ride with them, the occasional, "Are we there yet?" and the follow-up, "When are we going to be there?" or his favorite, "How much longer before we're there?" pelted Rob's highway-dulled consciousness like cold raindrops on his brow. But this drive was different. From doctor's office to home with a stop at the donut shop, all told a ride of less than 30 minutes, Rob could only wish for his passenger to say anything, because Jerry hadn't said a word. And as they pulled into the driveway, Rob about to implode from the force of his son's sulk that filled the front seat of the Malibu with the pressure of the bottom of the sea, the dreaded question, "Are we there yet?" even filled the driver's mind. "All right, and—" Rob turned the key to shut down the engine. Car stopped in the driveway. "We're home." "I know," Jerry croaked. Jerry reached for the door latch. "Hey, don't forget your chocolate-covered crawlers. Mom's going to put on some double chocolate cocoa. We'll shoot it through with a half can of whip, and you'll be a brand new guy. Return of the Cocoa King Kid, huh? We'll go down to Alfonso's, too, later for dinner, Jerry. How about that? Pile of meatballs over your head. What do you say? Anything you want. It's a special day. Dr. Skelton says you're doing great." Rob reeled off the words like a carnival barker, trying hard to sell a ticket to a new sideshow nobody wanted to see. He was as aware as was Jerry of the unspoken thing twirling in the center ring of the tent. Something awful neither of them had the heart to look at. Rob clutched the bag of doughnuts, lifting it from the space between them, and thrust the crinkly, waxy white paper onto Jerry's lap. Jerry let go of the door handle and took the bag, tucking it under one arm, as if it was a wad of dirty laundry he had no interest in having cleaned. He looked straight at Rob. "Today's no different from yesterday, Dad, and tomorrow's going to be about the same." Jerry told him in a voice rumbling a level lower than Rob had ever heard it come loose from his throat before. Jerry exited the car, saying to himself, "That wasn't the all clear. That was the all over," and he pushed the door shut. They went inside. Jerry went up to his room. "How's he taking it?" Jill asked, before realizing Jerry was not coming back downstairs. "Not too well," Rob answered, spilling the hot cocoa down the drain, sticking the donuts in the fridge. "Better call Mickey at Alfonso's. Cancel the reservation." No, it wasn't going to be forever. Not on the grown-up clock. Years, once over, seemed to have passed like oncoming traffic on the interstate to Rob. Jerry saw it differently, of course. And, in a secretly perverse way, both Rob and Jill had even hoped that Jerry would, also secretly, discover that his hockey hiatus was somehow charmed. He hadn't been playing. His coach was no ball of fun. Rob's secret was that he was somewhere hidden inside, rejoicing at the fact that he and Jerry had seen the hind quarters of Herman Harman. Jill's private reverie was in that she had seen the back end of nights like last November at Rink. Jerry's secret was a surprise to himself. From the moment that Dr. Skelton had told him that he was done, and with increasing power as day turned into lonely night holed up in his bedroom, Jerry was discovering something. It was that he was still a part of the team. Even if he had not gotten hurt and stayed fastened to the bench the entire season, he still would have been a part of the team. He would have rather have been playing, but what he had agonized over since the start of the season, as being the crumbs of just a half a loaf, Dr. Skelton's verdict had turned into a satisfying feast. He could at least be practicing with them, starting in a week or two, or maybe later, surely by late February. I know I'm better. I am better. I know it. Jerry turned these thoughts over and over in his head that early evening after Jill had taken his dinner up to his room. He said as much to Rob when Rob finally bucked up the courage to go upstairs and have a talk. Rob twisted and turned through the course of telling Jerry what Skelton had already made clear. You have your life ahead of you. You'll be back in time, and then playing hockey again until doomsday. But this was doomsday, Jerry thought, rolling away from his dad, with a sunken smile that said, "Thanks, but no thanks." Jerry handed Rob his not empty plate, with a half-eaten egg and meatloaf and mashed potato configuration upon it, a culinary foible he usually wolfed down. "It'll be okay, Jerry. You'll see." Rob faded from the room. He pulled the door not all the way shut and went downstairs more depressed than he had been before going up to give his pep talk. Rob knew he had been lying. Skelton had told him the truth. Jerry was never to play contact sports again. "He'll come around, Mr. Lake. I know how hard it is," Skelton said back to Rob over the phone as Rob stirred more sugar into his dark, molten drink. "I'll tell you, I do understand, because in my profession I have had to tell families, patience, all manner. God-awful news, the worst you can imagine. I thank my lucky stars. I thank your lucky stars. I did not have to include you in that category, Mr. Lake." Rob burned his mouth with his first sip of coffee, put the cup back down. "It was worse than you realize," Skelton continued. "This is why, in my prognosis, while I think Jerry has a 99% chance of a full recovery, 100% chance, I must insist that, as I told you, he avoid any chance of repeating a blow to the head for the foreseeable future. He's been fortunate, but another tap could break that egg." Rob entered Jerry's head like he never had before. "But, Doctor, what if he were to just, in a few weeks, once he's back at school, say, practice with the team? No, not take part in anything rough, but maybe just roam around the ice with the other kids at practice, a couple of times, or just once, Would that be okay? Not play, just kind of be there." Rob's voice was hushed. He knew he was on shaky ground. He didn't want Jerry to break his egg any more than the doctor was concerned he might do so. And Jill was firm. No more hockey. No more Harman. This is worse than trying to convince Jerry that he shouldn't go back to Bantams, Rob thought, blowing on his coffee and lighting up a smoke. He's hurting so bad, Dr. Skelton, worse than that night in a way. What that hard knock did to his head, not being able to be with the team, has done to his heart. Except, in this case, I think it might not turn out so well. We're going to lose the patient. I mean, this is his last year, or maybe it was. Rob puffed a haze about his head. "I understand." Skelton wheezed, as if Rob's smoke had penetrated the phone lines and was surrounding his head. "It's hard on the boy to take away what he loves the most. You have my sympathy, and as I was saying, I've had to tell patients their family's worse. And still, telling Jerry he was through with his hockey season was as hard as anything else I've ever had to say. In a way, I could feel his heart break myself. Thanks, Doctor, for talking. I guess that's all I wanted to do, really. You've done so much already. What more can I want?" Rob gulped his now ready-to-gulp coffee. The cigarette made smoke ribbons bloom from his nose. Yes, just as with his recovery from the injury itself, time is all he needs to put things right, Skelton said before saying goodbye, and that he would see Jerry for a quick checkup in a few weeks.